Hey everyone, and welcome to another Explainer. Today, we're time traveling way back to the year 1875 to unpack a seriously fascinating piece of source material. It perfectly captures the glaring, almost unbelievable ironies of 19th century Sino-British relations. We're going to untangle a deeply personal story that takes the massive, sweeping historical forces of the era and brings them right down to a single family's dinner table. It's a story about incredible wealth built on some pretty questionable foundations, the powerful, undeniable draw of a religious calling, and the incredibly dangerous clash of two completely different worlds. Okay, let's dive into this, because this question right here is the striking contradiction at the very heart of our explainer today. Think about it. On one side of the globe, you have British families living in ultimate luxury, and it's all funded by selling opium to the Chinese. But then, on the exact opposite side of the globe, you have idealistic young people from those exact same wealthy families traveling over to China to try and save souls. So how do these two completely opposed worlds intersect? Well, they intersect through one specific family.
To really understand this intense battle of ideologies, we need to meet our two central figures. First up, we have John Trader, and honestly his name tells you exactly who he is. He's a highly practical, wildly successful Scottish merchant who is all about commerce, comfort, and providing a lavish life for his favorite daughter, Emily. On the flip side, we have Henry Whiteparish, Emily's cousin. Henry is the complete opposite. He represents faith, extreme sacrifice, and a total willingness to step directly into grave danger in China as a newly minted missionary. Let's start by setting the scene with Section 1, an opium merchant's paradise. Our source text gives us this incredible look at the shifting economic engines of the British Empire. Back in the 1840s, John Trader built his immense wealth. Actually, scratch that. He built an absolute financial empire through the highly controversial opium trade with China. But as the decades rolled by, things changed. By the 1860s, British planters figured out how to grow tea in India. And by the 1870s, the British public's palate had totally shifted away from Chinese tea toward the darker Darjeeling brew. Trader's business seamlessly pivoted to importing Indian tea. This transition ironically made him even wealthier, while completely allowing the dark, opium-stained origins of his money to quietly fade into the background. And all that massive wealth materialized into a place called Drumlomond. Picture this, a solid, breathtaking red sandstone estate in Scotland. It was a literal paradise for John's growing children. We're talking wide open spaces, pristine stables, excellent fishing grounds, and even a sprawling conservatory complete with a paged parrot. It was serene, it was safe, and it was deeply comfortable. But here's the massive historical irony we really need to take away from this. This absolute picture-perfect postcard of rural British domesticity was entirely bought and paid for by the devastation of the Chinese opium trade. Which brings us right into Section 2, a shocking proposal. Now, this quote is the ultimate catalyst of our story. John Trader is completely blindsided when Henry Whiteparish, the young idealistic missionary, asks for his beloved daughter Emily's hand in marriage. When John immediately tries to shut the whole thing down, Emily drops this absolute bombshell. John is left reeling. I mean, the very idea that a missionary, a devoted man of the church, could or would even participate in a scandalous elopement completely shatters John's understanding of the situation. He realizes, with a sense of dread, that he might actually lose his daughter to a man who simply won't take no for an answer. Desperate to save her, John tries to reason with Emily. He quickly realizes that her whole idea of going abroad is entirely based on a highly romanticized, luxurious vacation she once took to Paris. You know, the kind where she learned a little rudimentary French and enjoyed sightseeing. John frantically tries to explain the stark reality here. Moving to a Chinese mission is absolutely not a Parisian holiday. It means grueling manual labor, living in constant, extreme danger, and total language isolation where no one speaks a word of English. You are entirely surrounded by a deeply foreign culture. But Emily, totally blinded by the romance of the idea, just refuses to listen. So, things escalate as we move into Section 3, the harsh realities. Now, what's really interesting about this quote is who is actually saying it. This doesn't come from John. This comes from Cecil Whiteparish, Henry's very own father. Cecil is a man who literally travels the country raising funds for these missions. He deeply believes in the cause. Yet, upon hearing the news, he races across the country in a hansom cab, downs a heavy tumbler of Scottish whiskey, and proceeds to completely dismantle Emily's romanticized worldview. He tells her, straight to her face, that she is entirely unsuited for this life.
It's wild. Even a man who funds the missions actively discourages people from casually joining them. Cecil's philosophy here is incredibly stark. He believes missionary work isn't some fun adventure to be desired. It is a grueling, often punishing calling. In his extensive experience, the very best priests and missionaries don't actually want to walk that stony path. Instead, they are driven by a force they simply cannot ignore. He senses, quite accurately, that Emily is nearly in love with the idea of being a missionary's wife, rather than being genuinely called to the immense suffering and sacrifice the work actually demands. Cecil methodically breaks down exactly what she is going to face, and let me tell you, it's a grim list. Put yourself in her shoes for a second. He warns of a constant, crushing lack of money. He tells her that just when she thinks she has found a true convert, they will inevitably prove untrustworthy and let her down. He warns of the extreme marital stress these harsh conditions will place on her and Henry. And perhaps the heaviest blow of all, he warns of the deep, unending loneliness and yearning for her Scottish home. Yet, remarkably, Emily is totally unfazed. She honestly believes that God and Henry's love will give her all the strength she needs. That tension sets the stage for Section 4, a clash of cultures. To really highlight the sheer madness of what Emily is willingly giving up, the source text spends a good chunk of time detailing a typical Thursday lunch at the Drumlomond estate right after the wedding. They sit down to cold beef, pickle, and a specialized French wine called Beaujolais, which the local vintner insists absolutely must be served chilled. They follow all this with elaborate chef-prepared pastries. It's a vivid scene of extreme insulated luxury. Think about that. They are casually sipping chilled French wine in a sprawling Scottish mansion just weeks before they plan to drop themselves into absolute rugged deprivation. During this incredibly luxurious lunch, John Trader probes Henry about his plans, and this brilliantly illustrates Henry's surprisingly pragmatic approach to his work. First, he plans to completely adopt local Chinese merchant dress to show respect. Yes, he recognizes the climate benefits, but more importantly, he desperately wants to connect with the locals on their terms, not his. Second, he is fiercely committed to avoiding the construction of massive dominating churches. You see, Henry specifically criticizes the highly dangerous concept of triumphalism. That's the arrogant belief that one's culture should visually and practically conquer all others. Henry points out that the Catholic Church had been building massive cathedrals directly on top of ancient Chinese temple sites or right on the grounds of local governors' estates. For Henry, this only breeds massive resentment. He strongly believes that alienating the local population by aggressively trumpeting your own superiority is not just unchristian, it's a completely terrible strategy in a country you don't even control. And that leads us to our final part, Section 5, the looming danger. To truly understand what Henry and Emily are walking into, we have to impartially look at the historical context, the very fresh scars in China. The local population is deeply and quite understandably suspicious of British foreigners. Why? Well, because of the devastating opium wars that enriched families like Emily's, because of the deeply disrespectful, violent burning of the Summer Palace by foreign troops, and because of the horrific Taiping Rebellion. That was a civil war causing staggering death and devastation, led by rebels who claimed to worship the exact same Christian deity that the British missionaries were now bringing over. The Chinese population had every historical reason to view these newcomers with profound distrust. And that distrust, it was being fully weaponized. Henry calmly reveals at lunch that popular tracts and broadsheets were widely circulating in the streets of China. These vicious rumors accused Christians of kidnapping Chinese children and drinking their blood. It was horrifying, medieval-style propaganda, literally the exact same kind of blood libel used against marginalized groups throughout history. But for Emily and Henry, this wasn't just some crazy rumor to brush off. It was a direct physical threat to their lives that could incite a deadly riot at any given moment. Despite knowing absolutely all of this, Henry maintains a rather startling composure. He reassures his nervous new father-in-law with this quote, "If at some time in the future, God forbid, things got too bad, there should be time to get Emily out quickly." Henry genuinely believes that his pragmatic approach, his local dress, and his deep faith will be enough to shield them. He displays an optimism that, especially given the brutal historical context we just looked at, feels incredibly, almost dangerously naive. And that brings us to the end of our explainer today. Upon hearing Henry's highly confident assurance, the seasoned, ruthlessly practical merchant John Trader doesn't argue. He simply stares out at the sunset. He looks at the man taking his beloved daughter into an absolute powder keg of historical resentment, and he asks this final unresolved question. "So you could get them out in time. You're sure of that?" It's a haunting question that just hangs in the air. It forces all of us to ask ourselves, can good intentions and a respectful wardrobe truly protect you from the crushing weight of imperial history? Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this incredible explainer today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.